Hey guys, tonight we're about to trudge through the moonlit corridors of medieval castles, peep into smoky candlelit cottages, and if you're lucky, survive a day in the battered shoes of someone desperate to look beautiful, in an era where beauty standards were brutal, impossible, and just a little bit bonkers. Imagine you wake up and your first thought is, I hope my skin looks just pale enough to make people whisper I'm either noble or at death's door. Sunlight drifts through a dusty window, you squint, and already you're in trouble. The paler your face, the higher your status, but heaven help you if you get a tan. You're suddenly just another peasant trudging through muck. And if you think sunscreen will save you, let's just say medieval folks had their own, creative methods. You probably won't survive this beauty regime, but at least you'll learn how to apply lead paste with shaky hands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Always love seeing how many of you are drifting off across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes flutter closed, the room fades, and you're suddenly somewhere very old, colder, quieter, and haunted by the sense that everyone is staring at your face, especially if it's not almost translucent. There's a reason everyone you see in those medieval portraits looks like they've just received really bad news. They're busy chasing that pale porcelain perfection, and it's no easy task. You wake at dawn, the rooster crows, and unless you're one of the lucky few who can afford to sleep past sunrise, you're already worried about your skin. For nobles, and anyone who hoped to pass for one, the goal was to look as though you'd never worked a day outdoors in your life. Tanned, you might as well admit you spend your afternoons hauling turnips in the mud. Historians still argue whether this obsession was always tied to status, or whether it also signalled spiritual purity. After all, the paler the nun, the more people seem to think she'd reached some level of heavenly devotion. Now you're not reaching for SPF 50. No, you're more likely mixing up a homemade concoction, because medieval sunscreen was a dangerous blend. Want to lighten your face? How about a bit of lead paste, some vinegar, and maybe a dusting of white flour? Yes, lead. In fact, the paler your skin, the more likely you are to be slowly poisoning yourself. The Venetian Cerus, a favourite beauty cream, was basically lead mixed with vinegar. Something you'd recognise today as a recipe for neurological disaster. But hey, fashion before function, right? Of course, not everyone could afford such risky luxuries. If you're a peasant, you get your pale face by default, because you're probably malnourished and anemic. Congratulations, you've achieved the wasted away look naturally. Still, if you want to look even paler, there are tricks for that. Chalk, flour, or the classic, not at all unsettling egg mask, which leaves your face with the texture of a week-old loaf of bread. And while we're on the topic of pale faces, let's talk about veins. Yes, visible veins, especially blue ones, were all the rage. If you really want to turn heads in a medieval court, you'll carefully draw blue lines on your temples and hands, making your skin look even more fragile and refined. The sicker you look, the more beautiful you are. It's a beauty ideal you don't see much on Instagram now, unless there's a new Victorian consumption chic trend we haven't noticed yet. But why all this obsession with being ghostly white? The mainstream historical fact is that, throughout much of medieval Europe, pale skin was a sign of wealth and privilege. Nobles didn't work in the sun, peasants did. So to be pale was to proclaim, I have servants for that. The whiter the skin, the further removed you were from physical labour, and by extension, from poverty. Still, historians debate whether this standard was always as rigid as we imagine, or whether there were moments and regions where rosy cheeks and a sun-kissed glow crept in as marks of health. That didn't stop people from taking desperate measures. For the upper crust, every morning was a battle. You can almost picture Lady Eleanor perched at her vanity, dabbing white lead to her face, holding her breath as a maid draws those blue lines on her delicate wrists. The goal isn't to look alive, but to look just this side of being an artfully preserved corpse. One wrong move, a little too much sun, and suddenly your marriage prospects plummet. The quirky tidbit here? Some medieval folks went so far as to bleed themselves, yes, with leeches or knives, to remove the redness from their cheeks and achieve that ultra-pale look. If you've ever called a beauty routine painful, just remember, at least it doesn't involve a bucket of leeches and a hope that you don't pass out. Meanwhile, the church wasn't exactly helping matters. Medieval sermons sometimes compared pale skin to purity of soul, a clean, untarnished vessel. The whiter your skin, the less touched by sin you seemed. At least according to those thundering preachers who probably never applied lead paste but enjoyed a good metaphor. Historians still argue whether these religious attitudes directly influence beauty rituals, or if both just happen to converge in the same, slightly alarming direction. Of course, there were exceptions, sometimes regional, sometimes just personal. In Mediterranean climates, a bit of sun on your cheeks wasn't always scandalous, and folk traditions occasionally praised the apple-cheeked country maiden. But try telling that to the bored court ladies in Paris or London, who spent whole afternoons in dimly lit rooms to avoid even the faintest tan. The joke? They probably missed the sun almost as much as they missed a decent dental plan. You trudge through a medieval marketplace noticing how women tuck themselves into the shade of overhanging wooden stalls, ducking out of sunlight like startled bats. Even the children are trained. "Cover your face," their mothers hiss, dashing across a muddy road, clutching homemade sun shields, which are really just scraps of linen or, in a pinch, their own hands. But there's a darker side to all this. The desperate pursuit of paleness led to real suffering. Lead poisoning was not uncommon. Symptoms included everything from skin rashes and stomach pain to tremors and eventually madness. The worst part? Many women never knew that their beauty potions were killing them, only that their friends admired their skin, right up until the moment it turned grey and papery. The price of beauty was, quite literally, deadly. Modern asides aside, there's a certain irony to it all. Today people pay for spray tans and golden highlighter, but centuries ago, women and men alike would do almost anything to look like they'd never seen the sun. You might spend hours concocting a face paste, risk your health, and ruin your bed linens, only to have someone mistake you for a member of the Walking Dead. But if you're a man, don't get too comfortable. You weren't off the hook. Noblemen also strive for that delicate, nearly translucent complexion, especially at court. Too much colour in your face, and you might be mistaken for a soldier or, gasp, a labourer. Some even went so far as to powder their faces just like the ladies, though they'd never admit it in public. Historians still argue about the extent of these male beauty rituals, but there are enough old recipes and complaints in letters to suggest it was a fairly open secret. Back in your medieval bedroom, you look in the mirror, or more likely a polished piece of metal, checking for any sign of redness. Did you scrub hard enough last night? Was the lead paste evenly applied? You sigh. Maybe tomorrow your veins will look even bluer, your skin a shade paler, your place at court a little more secure. In the background, somewhere outside, a rooster crows again. The sun's rising, but you'll spend your day dodging its rays. Beauty, after all, is a full-time job. If only someone had invented sunglasses and SPF, you might have had a fighting chance. But as the day drifts on and you slip deeper into sleep, you realise the real medieval beauty secret wasn't in the lead, or the leeches, or the endless hours spent indoors. It was in convincing everyone else that your suffering was worth it, that the price you paid in pain or poison or just plain boredom made you a little more beautiful, a little more noble, and if you squint, maybe a little more human. You're still there, perched on a creaking stool in your candlelit room, peering into your little mirror, fretting about your pallor, but now your attention drifts higher to your hairline. Because in medieval Europe, it's not enough to look like you haven't seen the sun since you were 6. Now, you have to look like you haven't had a normal hairline either. The ideals of forehead so grand and high, it would make even a modern supermodel do a double take. Here's the reality. The more forehead you show, the better. nobility, fashion, and even art start dictating that the perfect face is one with a vast, gleaming expanse above the brows, a five-head, as some would snicker today. So what do? You pluck, and pluck, and pluck. And if plucking isn't enough, you shave, or, if you're feeling truly adventurous, you apply caustic concoctions to dissolve those stubborn baby hairs at the edge of your scalp. Forget threading your eyebrows. This is full-on landscaping. This fashion wasn't just for women, though ladies certainly led the trend. You'd see high-born women in their bedchambers, squinting by the firelight, tweezers in hand, wincing as they tug out hair after hair. Some even enlisted their maids for the task, turning hair, plucking into an after-dinner ritual. If you want to be beautiful, you must endure. There's even an old saying, beauty knows no pain. In medieval times, pain was more of a guarantee than a risk. Mainstream historical fact: paintings from the 15th century, like those of the regal Elizabeth Woodville or even the famed Mona Lisa, show impossibly high foreheads. Sometimes so smooth and broad, you wonder if the artist just got bored of drawing hair. It was a real trend. Artists didn't just make this up. They reflected the standards of their era. But here's the quirky tidbit. The medieval recipe books didn't stop at simple plucking or shaving. Some recommended using a mixture of walnut oil and vinegar as a sort of ancient nair, intended to discourage hair from growing back. Others suggested rubbing in burnt barley or even cat dung. Imagine waking up each day, deciding whether you'd rather have stubble or smell faintly of barnyard. Talk about a beauty routine with character. And just when you think you've finished, the fashion moves again. If your eyebrows are too close to your hairline, you'll need to start thinning them too. Some women went so far as to scrape back the skin, searching for every last trace of fuzz. The only thing more dangerous than failing to achieve the look was succeeding, since infection, irritation, and scars were all too common side effects. Medieval beauty products weren't exactly FDA approved. Historians still argue whether this high forehead obsession came from the influence of certain royal courts, maybe France or Italy, where new fashions spread quickly, or whether it was more about distinguishing the civilized from the rustic. After all, if you have the time and money to devote to endless grooming, you're probably not busy churning butter. As you wander the castle halls, you notice other women, all with their hair tightly bound under hoods or veils, their foreheads gleaming and bare. Some look proud, some sheepish, and some just look tired. You realise that, just as with skin tone, these standards create a kind of secret code. One glance, and you know who belongs, and who doesn't. The irony? Sometimes men joined in as well, especially those involved in courtly life or portraiture. There are records of knights and even clergy smoothing their hairlines, eager to look intellectual. There's a joke that if you lived back then and your family had a particularly low hairline, you'd probably be the talk of the village, and not in a good way. "Look at that fellow," someone might whisper at the market. His hair starts halfway down his face. Unthinkable. Yet for every trend, there's a cost. Those caustic pastes and homebrew potions weren't gentle. Many women developed sores or permanent bald patches, and some found themselves unable to grow hair ever again. You can almost imagine the awkward family dinner. "Mother, why is your forehead so red?" "Never you mind, darling, just pass the leeches." Here's a fun callback for you. Remember the lead-based lotions from section 1? Imagine combining those with an acidic hair remover, then trying to smile gracefully at a banquet. The truth is, nobody probably looked as serene as their portraits suggest. Behind the scenes, beauty hurt, and it showed. But let's not give the upper classes all the credit for wild beauty rituals. Even peasant women, who couldn't afford walnut oil or imported tweezers, sometimes participated using sharpened sticks, or even clamshells, ingenuity at its finest. If it removes hair, it's good enough. The scholarly debate continues. Did these standards truly trickle down to the countryside, or did peasants just laugh at the rich behind closed doors? Some folk stories suggest that village women mocked the high-browed city ladies, claiming only those with something to hide would scrape away so much of their own hair. So much for solidarity. Still, the pressure remains. The higher your forehead, the more people believe you're wise, noble, and, let's be honest, a little bit intimidating. Even now, if you catch a glimpse of yourself in a modern mirror, you might wonder if you'd have survived the medieval makeover. And for a final odd detail, some medieval beauty experts recommended wearing a cap or band across the hairline overnight, supposedly to train the hair to stay back. The result? You'd wake up with a crease across your forehead and, if you were unlucky, less hair than you started with. Fashion meet futility. It's not just women's faces that are changing in these centuries. The entire notion of what's beautiful is a moving target. One year, it's all about the highbrow. The next, maybe it's something else entirely. You drift to sleep, forehead tingling with phantom plucking pains, thankful that at least you're safe from vinegar-scented scalp cream. But as you drift further, another thought sneaks in. All this effort for something as fleeting as a fashion trend. Historians still argue whether people truly believed these standards were natural, or whether deep down everyone knew it was just another way for society to draw lines between rich and poor, in and out, beautiful and, well, human. You roll over in your medieval bed, cheeks pressed against the lumpy straw mattress, and wonder, if only they'd had Instagram, how many tutorials would there be for high forehead hacks? Would there be a number Forehead Friday? But the candle sputters, the castle goes quiet, and you, with your vast expanse of freshly plucked brow, are left alone with your thoughts. Beauty is pain, but sometimes it's just plain weird. You're lying there, half awake in your drafty chamber, still nursing the sting from your most recent forehead plucking, and suddenly you remember the real badge of medieval beauty is cascading, impossibly long, glossy hair. Not the kind of hair that just grows. No, this is hair that ripples like a silk banner in a summer breeze, framing that freshly expanded brow in waves that seem to shimmer in candlelight. For women, especially, hair is everything. The longer, thicker, and glossier, the better. Men had their own hair anxieties, but for women, hair was almost a currency. Something you guarded, cherished, and sometimes weaponized. The ideal? Hair so long it can be coiled into elaborate braids, tucked under a headdress, or left loose and artfully displayed on rare occasions. If you're single and looking, you want everyone to notice your locks. If you're married, your hair goes under wraps, literally. But whether on display or hidden beneath yards of linen, hair has to be healthy and abundant, a symbol of youth and fertility. Unfortunately, your body has other plans, what with the stress of daily medieval life, malnutrition, and, let's face it, some questionable hygiene habits. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval women did indeed prize long hair, and there's plenty of evidence in art and literature to prove it. Poems praise golden tresses, and tales abound of heroines with hair that could be knotted into ropes or spun into thread. Some noble women never cut their hair at all, except perhaps once in childhood. The only times hair might be shorn, as a punishment, think nuns or penance, or in dire health emergencies. Otherwise it was to be tended like a garden, if your garden was subject to lice, split ends, and more than a few disastrous homemade tonics. Now you probably don't have access to modern shampoo. If you're lucky, your household might have sweet-smelling herbs, rosemary, lavender, or rose petals, boiled and strained to create a fragrant rinse. If not, you're stuck with basic soap, harsh, lye-heavy, and more likely to turn your hair into straw than silk. A good hair day in medieval Europe is a rare and celebrated thing, and you can bet people notice. Your hair looks almost clean is genuinely a compliment. But here's the quirky tidbit. Hair pieces and fake plaits were not just for the super rich. Plenty of women resorted to padded rolls, hair extensions made from goat or horsehair, or even discarded human hair gathered by enterprising maids from combs and brushes. If you've ever worried about extensions showing at a party, just imagine your neighbour glancing over and noticing your brand new braid smells faintly equestrian. Some women even went as far as to dye their hair with risky brews, saffron for a hint of gold, walnut husk for chestnut brown, or lie to strip colour entirely. The results were unpredictable, but the effort always monumental. So you sit trying to coax your hair into a passable braid, wincing as the comb snags. And if your hair isn't long enough, well, you can fake it. There are stories of women saving their own shed hair all year, twisting it into rats. Hair cushions, not the rodent. Although with medieval cleanliness, who can say for sure, to pad out their buns or rolls. The more elaborate your hairstyle, the more status you broadcast. For men, the rules shift. In some eras, knights sported flowing locks, symbolic of strength and vitality. In others, fashion demanded a neat bob or tonsure, a monk's classic shaved crown. But for both sexes, hair was a statement, and the pressure to keep up appearances never quite faded. Historians still argue whether these elaborate hair rituals were strictly enforced or mostly reserved for high society. Did village girls with bobbed hair feel left out, or did they just laugh at the silly trends of the nobility? Some medieval manuscripts suggest that even farm girls took pride in their hair, using simple oils when they could get them, and borrowing styles seen at church festivals. But the stakes for noblewomen were higher. Imagine being judged not just for your virtues, but for how glossy your hair looked in firelight. Marriage negotiations could hinge on it. Suitors might ask about your hair before your family's fortune. There's even a record of one 15th century Italian countess refusing to attend a feast because a sudden mishap left her with a lopsided braid. There's an open scholarly debate about whether these beauty standards were genuinely oppressive, or if, for some, they offered a rare chance for self-expression in a rigid world. Did some women relish the chance to outbraid their rivals, to gather admiring glances at the May Day fair? Or did most of them, like you, just sigh at the endless fuss, the pain of combing, the threat of lice, and the embarrassment of the occasional rat's nest? And that brings us to hygiene, because with all this hair comes trouble. Medieval combs made of bone or wood were precious objects, sometimes passed down through generations. Lice were common, so daily combing became both necessity and ritual. If your hair ever became truly infested, you might shave your head altogether and start over, though if you were noble, you'd cover this up as best you could, with a wimple, hood, or veil. Bad Hair Day takes on a whole new meaning when it lasts for weeks. Then there are the styles. Across Europe you see everything. Tight buns, elaborate plaits wound with ribbons or beads, flowing curls for the lucky few who had them naturally, and, for the very fashionable, hair netted in gold or silver thread. If you could afford it, you hired a servant just for your hair. If not, well, you made do. And sometimes making do involved mud and spit to hold a style together. That's right. Hair gel was occasionally a handful of earth mixed with a prayer. Take that, modern beauty influencers. One light joke to lighten the load. Ever hear of hair of the dog? In medieval times, the phrase might have meant literally tying stray animal hairs into your braid for volume. The trend never really caught on with the canines themselves. Another fun fact: some women, to display the length and health of their hair, only revealed it in private or on special occasions. There's even evidence that a maiden's uncovered hair was considered so alluring that it was only permitted for young, unmarried women in church. Married women kept their hair hidden at all times. It was scandalous for a wife to let her hair down in public. The phrase meant something a bit more literal back then. All of this comes with a heavy dose of competition. Whether at a village festival or a royal banquet, you're always aware of who's got the shiniest, longest locks, who's using the newest hair tonic, who arrived with an extra plated twist this season. If you ever thought beauty was exhausting in the modern world, try doing it with lice, lead, and no Instagram filters. The scholarly debate continues. Did these standards filter down to all levels of society? Some historians say yes, pointing to folk traditions and village tales. Others argue that for many, hair was simply practical, tied back for work and only styled for church or festival days. What's clear is that for those who could afford it, and those who aspired to climb the social ladder, hair care was an endless, intricate, and occasionally absurd quest. And as you finally fall asleep, hair tangled but heart a little lighter, you can't help but feel a glimmer of camaraderie with those medieval women. Across the centuries, the tools and styles may change, but the desire to be seen, admired, and sometimes just to fit in remains. You reach up, pat your own hair, and promise yourself, no more horsehair extensions, at least not tonight. You're waking again, or at least shifting in your bed of straw and wool, and now you realise your face and hair aren't the only things up for scrutiny. In the candlelit world of the Middle Ages, your entire silhouette is judged, especially your waistline. You might assume corsets are an invention of the later centuries, but the truth is, medieval folk already had plenty of tricks for squeezing themselves into the ideal shape, and it's rarely comfortable. The era's poetry and art praise slender waists, gently swelling hips, and a delicate, almost frail figure for women. Never mind that most peasants have bodies built by years of work and bread. Nobility, though, were expected to look soft, willowy, and somehow ethereal, not strong, not muscular, not robust, just fragile enough to make anyone worry you'd blow away in a stiff breeze. Mainstream historical fact: by the 13th and 14th centuries, fitted gowns became the height of fashion for upper-class women. These gowns were tailored close to the torso, laced tightly at the sides or back, and constructed to show off a narrow waist. The cote hardie, a fitted dress, became especially popular. If you're a noblewoman, your maid might spend half an hour each morning yanking laces tight and fussing over the smoothness of your bodice. But here's the quirky tidbit. Before the age of whalebone corsets, people stuffed garments with reeds, tow, flax fibres, or even bundles of moss to shape their figure. Some women wore padded rolls or bum rolls around the hips to exaggerate the difference between waist and hip, creating that coveted hourglass look. If it squished, poked, or made you walk funny, it was probably in fashion at some point. You tug at the laces of your dress, sucking in your stomach as your maid cinches the sides tighter. Breathe in. No, tighter. The goal isn't comfort, it's appearance. Don't worry about eating a hearty meal, there's no room for it now. Many a lady skipped breakfast and lunch, just to maintain the illusion. If you faint at church, people might call it delicate constitution, but more likely, it's just the lack of food and the lack of space to breathe. Historians still argue whether these extreme silhouettes were really enforced on all women, or whether the trend was reserved for a few ultra-fashionable courts in France, Burgundy, or Italy. Some records show working women wore their gowns looser, simply for practicality's sake. But one thing is certain, as soon as you set foot near nobility, the pressure is on. You know those images in illuminated manuscripts of women with impossibly slender torsos? That wasn't all artistic license. Some women did everything possible to appear slim, layering, lacing, and even slouching to trick the eye. There are tales of young girls being trained to stand and move gracefully, with books balanced on their heads and heavy wooden boards tied to their backs to teach straight posture and the proper way to carry themselves. Well, let's pause for a joke. Ever try to run in a tightly laced dress? Don't. Not unless you want to trip over your own feet, rip a seam, and end up the talk of the castle. Lady Marjorie fell again, should have loosened her laces. But the obsession didn't stop at the waist. Flat stomachs, small busts and narrow shoulders were in vogue at various times. Some women resorted to tight undergarments. Linen bands wound round the chest, squeezing everything down and in. The look was youthful and pure, though the comfort level was somewhere between sleeping on rocks and hugging a tree trunk. There's also the ever-popular belt slung low on the hips, studded with gems or intricate metalwork. A belt wasn't just an accessory, it was a status symbol. The fancier the belt, the more people assumed you were important. Sometimes these belts were gifts from husbands to wives, a not-so-subtle reminder to stay trim. Talk about pressure. Men, meanwhile, weren't entirely off the hook. While bulk was a sign of wealth, think robust, barrel-chested kings, there was also an expectation, especially among the young and fashionable, to appear athletic but not too muscular. The real prize was to look noble, not sweaty, not sunburned, just perpetually ready for a courtly dance. there's an open scholarly debate on whether body-shaping clothing like stays and padding were common, or if most people just made do with what their bodies naturally looked like. Some scholars argue that many depictions in art are aspirational. No one really looked like that, but everyone pretended. But for those in the middle of the social pyramid, the stress was real. Young women preparing for marriage, hopeful men aiming for court posts, all of them watched, compared, and sometimes suffered. There's even a story of one duchess who had extra ribs removed, or so the gossip went, to achieve a wasp waist. Historians say this is probably a myth, but it speaks volumes about what people thought possible, or expected. Quirky tidbit number 2. For those unable to shape themselves physically, some turn to illusion. There are records of artists painting shadowy lines on skin or undergarments to fake a slimmer figure. The earliest contouring, perhaps. Imagine powdering yourself before a big event, not for the face, but to shade a fake AB muscle or a sharper collarbone. The commitment was real. And let's not forget the stories of miracle waters and slimming potions, peddled by travelling quacks. Some recipes were harmless, just herbs and water, but others included dangerous ingredients like mercury or arsenic. Yes, for a smaller waist, some people risked their lives. It makes you grateful that today's diet fads rarely come with an actual skull and crossbones label. The scholarly debate continues. Did these deadly concoctions really work? Or were people just fooled by a placebo effect, and maybe a few days of being violently ill? We'll never know for sure, but one thing is clear. If someone told you it would make you slimmer, you'd probably try it. Yet not everyone played along. Some women, especially in rural areas, rejected the tight-laced look, instead tying their belts loosely and embracing their working bodies. There are peasant dances depicted in art where women wear loose, colourful skirts, spinning with wild abandon. Not every medieval beauty standard filtered down to the hayfields. For those who did endure the laces and rolls and endless pressure to appear fragile, there were compensations, attention, better marriage prospects, a sense of belonging to the in crowd, but it was exhausting. By evening, as you finally unlaced your gown, you'd sigh with relief and rub the red marks from your ribs, promising yourself that tomorrow you'd loosen up just a bit. But then, you remember, tomorrow is the May Day festival and everyone will be watching. You'll wake early, struggle into your dress and try not to faint during Mass. Beauty may be pain, but in the Middle Ages it was also a full-time job, one with very little room for snacks. As you drift off, you think about the strange things people did to fit in, how the shape of your waist could change your whole life, or at least how people saw you. And as the moon rises over the castle and you curl up, body still aching from a day of beauty, you wonder if it was all worth it. Tomorrow maybe you'll tie your belt loose and dance with the peasants, or maybe, just maybe, you'll invent sweatpants a few centuries early. You roll to your side, half cocooned in scratchy linen, and feel the pinch of your shoes. Yes, those shoes. Because tonight you're not just a head of hair, a wan face or a corseted waist, but a pair of dainty feet squished and shuffled into a pointy-toed nightmare. The medieval beauty ideal for feet is, let's say, uniquely punishing. The smaller and more delicate, the better. Forget comfort. If your toes aren't tingling with pain, you're not doing it right. Imagine stepping out of bed, already bracing yourself for the squeeze. If you're a noble, your shoes aren't practical boots or sturdy sandals. No, your prized possession is a pair of poulaines, shoes with tips so long and narrow that walking is a calculated risk. Some poulaines, also called crackawees, have toes that extend 6, 8, even 12 inches past the actual foot, sometimes supported with little whalebone or wire stays so the points won't drag sadly behind you. The longer the toe, the higher your status, until, inevitably, the king or the church declares a moral panic and tries to ban them for being too outrageous. Mainstream historical fact: in the 14th and 15th centuries, pointy shoes were all the rage in courts from Paris to Prague. Lawmakers and priests alike decried them as symbols of vanity, pride, and danger to morals. Some towns even passed laws restricting how long the points could be, especially for commoners. If you're caught with poulains beyond the permitted length, you might be fined, or more humiliatingly, have your shoes cut down in public. Picture the scene: a burly town constable snipping your fancy tips while the market crowd giggles. For women, shoes often meant balancing on fragile platforms called pattens, especially if you had to wade through muddy streets. Pattens could raise you several inches above the muck, but at the price of stability. No wonder medieval cities rang with the clatter of wooden soles and the occasional squeal of someone losing their balance and tumbling into the filth. The quirky tidbit? People got creative to cheat the standards. Some stuffed the toes of their shoes with wool or even sand so their feet wouldn't slide forward and crumple painfully. There are tales of court jesters secretly filling a rival's shoes with pebbles as a prank. Nothing like watching Lady Marjorie hobble across the Great Hall with a forced smile, all in the name of beauty. But it's not just the shape of your shoes, it's your actual feet. Small, arched and dainty are the gold standard, and if you're cursed with a wide or long foot, you do what you can to disguise it. Some women wrap their toes tightly at night, hoping to mould their feet into daintier forms. There's no historical evidence of full-on foot binding in medieval Europe, like in other parts of the world, but the pressure to have pretty feet is real. And if you're born into the wrong gene pool, well, there are plenty of prayers to St. Crispin, patron of cobblers, for a reason. Historians still argue whether these tortuous shoes were truly everyday wear for most people, or if they were reserved for special occasions and the wealthiest nobles. After all, if you spend your days in fields or workshops, you need to actually walk. But for the aspiring and ambitious, at court, in town, or during feasts, the pointier, the better. There's a theory that a person's worth could be measured in inches of leather trailing from their toes. Let's break for a light joke. Ever try running in poulains? It's less dash and more awkward shuffle, with a 50% chance of tripping over your own status symbol. Medieval party games probably included a race around the manor, winner gets to keep their dignity and maybe their shoes. Still, not every beauty trend gets you noticed in a good way. Sometimes the fallout is literal. Pattens wobble, poulains snag on stairs, and by the end of a long feast, you're just grateful to pull your aching feet free and wiggle your toes by the hearth. Medieval folk might not have invented high heels, but they were masters of uncomfortable footwear. And yes, even then people gossiped. Did you see Lady Joan limping? Her shoes must be new, or she's just trying too hard again. If you're a man, especially a young, ambitious one, the pressure is no less. A long-pointed shoe was a sign that you didn't have to work, run, or do much of anything practical. Status was everything, and if it cost you a few blisters, so be it. There are records of young men in London and Paris spending entire paychecks on imported Italian leather shoes, hoping to attract notice at festivals or market days. Of course, footwear is one thing, but socks, not quite what you'd expect. Wealthier folk had hose, tight-fitting, brightly coloured, and sometimes lined with fur or padded for shape. The tighter the hose, the better. At one point, the craze for codpieces, padded or decorative flaps covering the groin, led to an arms race in hosiery, with men vying to display not just their feet, but their, well, let's just say their courage. That too became a sort of beauty standard, a peacock display of masculinity. The open scholarly debate: how far did these fashion extremes really spread? Were peasants saving for a fancy pair of shoes for feast days, or were these trends strictly for the 1%? Some evidence suggests festival days saw even the humblest folk trying out the latest look, if only for the fun of it. Shoes could be deadly too. Poor construction meant broken ankles, twisted knees, and the risk of infection from wounds. There are stories, half history, half cautionary tale, of young men dying of gangrene from a blister gone bad, all because they wanted to impress the daughter of the local baker. But not all shoes were disasters. In the countryside, people favoured practical footwear, simple boots, sandals, or going barefoot in warm months. There's a folk saying, barefoot in summer, rich in spirit, a gentle jab at city folk who traded comfort for class. Some villages even held foot races, where showing up in Polenz would guarantee instant mockery. The quirkiest tidbit: in some regions the shape of your shoe could signal your politics. The supporters of certain lords or guilds might wear distinctively shaped or decorated footwear, making your feet a kind of medieval bumper sticker. Imagine the town square. Oh, look at those round-toed shoes, must be from the wrong side of the river. It's not all misery, of course. Some clever cobblers crafted shoes with hidden pockets or charms stitched into the soles, believed to bring luck, love, or ward off evil spirits. Kids played games by trading shoe buttons or racing to see who could slide their patterns the farthest without falling. Even in a world obsessed with perfection, people found ways to turn discomfort into a little fun. By nightfall, when you finally kick off your shoes and let your feet throb in peace, you marvel at the lengths, literally and figuratively, people went to fit the medieval ideal. Sometimes you wonder if anyone really thought it was worth it. But tomorrow, when it's time for market day, you'll cram your toes right back in, because the world, then as now, is always watching. As you drift off again, feet tingling with phantom pains, you promise yourself that just for tonight, you'll appreciate the comfort of bare feet and soft grass, even if only in your dreams. You stretch your sore toes beneath the covers, thankful for a moment of comfort, but your mind drifts to another strange quirk of medieval beauty: the teeth. If you thought medieval folk spent their days with pearly whites gleaming in every candlelit hall, think again. The reality is, a mouthful of perfect teeth wasn't always the dream. In some circles, bad teeth, even ones that hinted at wealth's sweet rewards, were actually admired. Mainstream historical fact: sugar, that rare and expensive commodity, was introduced to Europe from the Middle East around the 11th century, becoming widely available to the rich by the late Middle Ages. Only nobles and the wealthiest merchants could afford it in any quantity. So, for a brief and peculiar period, blackened or rotting teeth could actually be a subtle sign of affluence. Your sweet tooth, quite literally, became a status symbol. You wake to find yourself in a noble's manor, and breakfast is a lavish spread of preserved fruits, honey cakes, and, if you're lucky, imported candied ginger. The air is thick with the scent of sugar, precious, expensive, and reserved for those who can afford a dentist, which, spoiler, hardly existed. To enjoy such treats is a mark of privilege. But here's the catch: all that sugar means cavities, aches, and a smile that could scare the crows from the fields. The quirky tidbit: some medieval ladies, inspired by the dental decay of the elite, are rumoured to have blackened their teeth on purpose, using burnt herbs or powdered charcoal, hoping to fake the sweet life. It's a medieval version of designer-ripped jeans, except with more toothaches and less street cred. And while sugar might give you fashionable bad teeth, the rest of society did what they could to keep theirs healthy, or at least intact. Medieval dental hygiene was a patchwork of old wives' tales and wishful thinking. You might chew on twigs or rinse with wine or vinegar, and if you could afford it, you'd buy tooth powders, made from crushed herbs, salt, or even ground oyster shell. If something really hurt, the barber surgeon, yes, the guy who cuts your hair and your boils, might offer to yank the offending tooth with pliers. No anaesthetic, just a mug of ale and a prayer. Historians still argue about how bad dental health actually was. Some studies suggest many medieval folk had surprisingly strong teeth, thanks to diets low in processed sugar and high in coarse bread and vegetables. Others point to skulls full of holes and abscesses as evidence that tooth pain was a near-constant companion for all classes. Here's a joke to lighten the mood. Why did Lady Eleanor always smile with her mouth closed? She didn't want anyone to know she was richer than the king, or that she had a mouthful of holes. It wasn't all about status, though. For some, healthy teeth were a must, especially for workers, soldiers, and anyone who needed all their molars to chew tough bread and dried meat. If you lost too many teeth, you'd find eating a challenge. Some folk remedies involve tying a frog to your jaw to draw out the pain, or sleeping with garlic cloves tucked in your cheek. The effectiveness is, let's say, open to debate. A quick aside: Toothaches weren't just uncomfortable, they could be deadly. Infections sometimes spread to the jaw or bloodstream, leading to swelling, fever and death. There are cases of knights sidelined by dental problems before a battle, or nobles missing a banquet because their face was swollen to twice its size. Back to the quirks. Medieval beauty standards didn't demand straight, gleaming white teeth. There were no orthodontists, no whitening strips, and certainly no braces. In fact, a gap between the front teeth, called a witch's window in some regions, was considered lucky or alluring, the sign of a good singer or a flirt. In France, they called it don du bonheur, lucky teeth. There are poems and love songs dedicated to ladies with charmingly gapped smiles, but for many bad teeth meant pain, and pain was just part of life. If you had a sweet tooth and the coin to indulge it, you might pay for it with a life of dental misery. If not, you'd chew your hard bread, hope for the best, and maybe borrow a prayer to St. Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. Open scholarly debate. How much did people care about teeth really? Did medieval folk simply accept pain and bad breath as the cost of living? Or did they envy the fashionable decay of the wealthy? There's little agreement and the records are patchy. Some chroniclers bemoan the rot caused by luxury, while others barely mention teeth at all. Back at your imaginary manor you stare at a bowl of candied violets and wonder if the risk is worth it. Still, the taste is heavenly, a brief sugary escape from daily drudgery. The party continues, the wine flows, and you can almost forget that tomorrow you'll wake with a jaw that throbs and a smile that's slightly less impressive than yesterday. In the countryside, peasants simply do what they must, rubbing with salt, chewing mint or sage and hoping their teeth last. There's a strange pride in keeping your own teeth well into old age. Grandmothers with all their molars are admired as hardy and blessed, not just lucky. A final odd fact. In some places, teeth were used as talismans. Lost teeth strung on a cord became protective charms for children, or were buried in the garden to ward off evil spirits. Teeth held power, even if you didn't love how yours looked. As you finally drift off, mouth aching in sympathy for those who came before, you marvel at the weirdness of a world where rot could be chic, and a good smile might mean anything but perfect white. You whisper thanks for your toothbrush, and maybe, just maybe, vow to skip dessert tomorrow. You're resting your jaw, grateful for the break from sugar-coated status symbols, when your focus drifts upward. Eyebrows. You might think the medieval brow was just a bit of furrowed mystery above the eyes, but oh, how wrong you'd be. In the candlelit smoky halls of the Middle Ages, your eyebrows could make, or break, your entire look. It's not just about having them, it's about having the right kind. Imagine peering into your polished bronze mirror, candle guttering beside you, and noticing your brows look, well, normal. Not good enough. For a few wild centuries, the perfect brow is almost invisible. Plucked until they're little more than a whisper, a ghost of a line, or sometimes vanished altogether. The high forehead look you endured in Section 2. The brow follows suit, tweezed and scraped to a frail suggestion hovering above that porcelain expanse. The higher and more barely there, the more you fit the current ideal. Mainstream historical fact. Across much of late medieval Europe, especially in the 15th century, fashion-forward noblewomen plucked their brows ruthlessly, echoing the style immortalised in paintings. There are endless portraits of queens and ladies whose foreheads seem to stretch on forever, framed by a faint, almost hesitant brow. The look is so popular that even literature makes sly jokes about girls with brows like clouds, barely there and ethereal. But not everyone followed the rules. The quirky tidbit. In some Italian and Spanish regions, dramatic painted brows had a moment of glory. If your own hair was too fair or patchy, you'd reach for a bit of lampblack or even burnt almond and sketch on an arch worthy of a saint or a villain. Some women, daring or bored or both, painted their brows in unusual shapes, dramatically peaked, almost as if surprised by life itself. Men, too, occasionally joined in, shading or accentuating their brows for portraits or big public events. It wasn't just plucking either. Recipes from medieval beauty books recommend concoctions of honey, vinegar, or even the juice of green walnuts to thin the hair, making plucking less painful. Debatable. Others suggested rubbing the skin with pumice stone, chasing the impossible dream of browless beauty. You might suffer a little redness, a few scabs, but fashion is fashion. There's an open scholarly debate about why the invisible brow trend took hold. Was it simply about following the lead of royal courts, or was there a deeper symbolism? Foreheads as seats of wisdom, and bare skin as a sign of purity and intellect. Some art historians argue that broad, smooth foreheads suggested innocence or spiritual openness, while others claim it was just another way to separate the rich, who could afford endless grooming, from everyone else. Yet, as with all beauty standards, the tides inevitably shift. In some regions, especially in later centuries, thick, arched brows come back into favour. There's a practical reason for this. If you're outside all day, a strong brow keeps sweat and dust from stinging your eyes. Some peasant girls kept their brows thick, and country tales abound of young men falling for the lass with the dark, honest brow. Even in the big cities, you'd sometimes see women with fierce, natural brows, usually the rebels, the outsiders, or the simply practical. Let's not forget the accidental comedy of beauty routines. One surviving letter from a young noblewoman complains that she lost her favourite brow to the fire, having leaned in too close while plucking by candlelight. Another joke. Why did Lady Cecily wear a hat indoors? She'd shaved her brows so far back she forgot where they belonged. The drama of the brow played out in church as well as court. For highborn girls, the pre-wedding brow ritual could involve hours of grooming, tinctures, and even a few superstitious charms, sprinkling salt, muttering prayers for a lucky face. Some believed that the shape of your brow foretold your fate in marriage or your capacity for virtue. One popular ballad went, "A brow too sharp, a tongue too keen, brings trouble to a marriage scene." But if invisible brows weren't for you, you could always paint a new pair. Recipes survive for coloured powders and homemade mascara, the soot from burnt cork, the juice of berries, a smear of animal fat as binding. The result? Sometimes dazzling, sometimes disastrous. Your new brows might run in the rain, smear in the heat, or fade as quickly as your patience. Still, for one shining moment, you'd have arches like the queens of legend. Historians still argue about how much the peasantry cared for such trends. Did they sigh and pluck along with the nobles, or did they simply laugh at courtly vanities? Some village tales poke gentle fun at ladies with no brows and nowhere to put them, suggesting a healthy skepticism in the wider population. For many, eyebrows were for catching sweat, not chasing status. There's another quirky detail. In some regions, the unibrow was prized. Across the Mediterranean, a single bold brow signalled intelligence and sensuality. Girls with faint brows would smear their foreheads with coal or lampblack to fake the look, hoping to catch a suitor's eye. Even in Northern Europe, the odd tale circulates of the girl with the joined brow being courted as a rare beauty. Of course, there were always rebels. Some simply refused to pluck and wore their full dark brows like a banner. Others experimented, shaving intricate shapes or even dyeing their brows to match their hair or headdress. The brow was both a canvas and a battleground. Open scholarly debate. Did these rituals empower women, giving them control over their looks, or did they enforce another impossible standard? Some argue the medieval brow game was about agency, a way to shape your identity. Others see it as pure conformity, a painful, endless race to fit in. By the end of a long day, or a longer night at the feast, your brows are sore, your patience worn thin, and your friends are debating whether you look more like a saint or a startled owl. But tomorrow, the game begins again. A new shape, a new recipe, a new hope for that perfect arch. You close your eyes, massaging your temples, and promise yourself that someday you'll let your brows do whatever they want. But for now, the standard reigns, silent, exacting, and like all medieval beauty trends, impossible to ignore. You drift a little deeper into the medieval night, the ghost of brow ache still tingling, only to realise that in this world, caring for your skin is a full-time occupation, a battle against dirt, disease, and the ever-looming demand for perfection. If you thought your modern skincare routine was a bit much, prepare yourself. Medieval beauty treatments make that 10-step serum ritual look like child's play, or maybe just child's punishment. In a time before antibiotics and actual dermatologists, your skin was both your reputation and your weakness. Every blemish whispered a secret. Too much sun, not enough money, a sleepless night, or even a sinful soul. The fairer, smoother, and more unblemished your skin, the higher your prospects, marriage, status, even spiritual credit. Meanwhile, one bad rash, a couple of pimples, or a nasty scar could turn you from courtly beauty to cautionary tale. Mainstream historical fact: medieval women, and plenty of men, used a dizzying array of lotions, masks, scrubs, and balms, all in the pursuit of luminous skin. Recipe books from the 14th and 15th centuries list concoctions made from almond milk, rose water, crushed pearls, egg whites, and honey, ingredients still found in some modern products. But they're joined by a parade of less savoury elements: lead powder, mercury, vinegar, pig fat, snail slime, and even, in the worst cases, animal dung. If you were rich, you could afford the good stuff. If you were poor, you improvised with whatever was left over after dinner. Let's be honest, a medieval spa day was less cucumber slices, more questionable chemistry set. You might start your morning with a splash of cold water, straight from the well, possibly shared with a duck. Then you reach for your whitening paste, a sticky blend of egg white, flour, and vinegar. If you're truly ambitious, or just a glutton for punishment, you'll slather on a brightening mask containing lead or mercury, never mind that both slowly poison you. There's something almost poetic about risking your health for a glow that could kill. The quirky tidbit: some beauty recipes called for crocodile dung, imported at great expense from the Mediterranean. Mixed with vinegar, it was spread across the skin as a kind of ancient exfoliant. This wasn't as rare as you'd hope. Apothecaries and would-be doctors swore by it. Next time you complain about an odd-smelling face mask, just be glad it doesn't come with scales. But not every routine was dangerous. Almond oil, honey, oatmeal, and rosewater were relatively gentle and remain classic favourites even now. Some women used crushed violets or lilies as a calming toner, and men sometimes splashed themselves with rosemary water for that freshly plucked scent. The village healer or midwife was your dermatologist, your pharmacist, and your therapist, dishing out advice for every complaint from freckles to boils. Still, skin was never just skin. A flawless face hinted at virtue, discipline, and God's favour. If you suffered from acne, eczema, or the pox, the stares from neighbours could be brutal. People believed that bad skin signalled bad character or even a curse. Superstitions that clung to villages and court alike. Historians still argue how much medieval folk understood about cleanliness and disease. Some records show regular bathing, especially among the wealthy or in bath-loving places like Hungary and southern Germany, while others insist most people washed only their hands and faces, avoiding full immersion for fear of illness. The truth? Likely a mix. In some towns, public bathhouses thrived, bustling with gossip, flirtation, and the occasional clandestine meeting. In others, water was reserved for the holy or the desperate. Bathhouses themselves were double-edged swords, places of cleanliness, but also rumoured dens of sin. Laws were passed, bathhouses shuttered, and rumours flew about what really happened behind those steamy doors. There's an open, scholarly debate. Did bathing help spread the infamous plagues, as some once believed? Or did the closure of bathhouses actually make things worse by making people dirtier? The jury is still out. The great irony? Some skin problems were simply the result of the very remedies used to fix them. Lead, mercury, and arsenic-based treatments caused peeling, rashes, sores, and eventually irreversible damage. There are surviving letters from ladies at court lamenting the mysterious rot on their cheeks, unaware they're poisoning themselves every morning. You almost want to hand them a bottle of sunscreen and a pamphlet on toxicology. Let's joke for a moment. Why did Lady Agnes never worry about wrinkles? She never lived long enough to get them, thanks to her daily dose of white lead. There's medieval beauty wisdom for you. Another quirky detail: scars from smallpox, chickenpox or injury were sometimes camouflaged with tiny bits of velvet or silk, glued right onto the skin. These beauty patches could be round, star-shaped, or even crescent moons. In some cases, a courtier might wear a whole constellation of patches, each one signalling a flirtatious mood or a witty rebuke to gossip. Why, yes, I do have a scar, but now it's a fashionable crescent, thank you very much. But if patches weren't your style, you could always try to bleed out the badness. Bloodletting, a common medical practice, was sometimes prescribed for skin complaints, along with poultices of mouldy bread or mashed beans. The more creative the remedy, the more convinced people became. If it smells this bad, it must be working. Might have been the unofficial motto of medieval skincare. For men, the standards weren't much gentler. Knights and scholars alike were expected to keep their faces clean, their beards trimmed, or at times entirely shaved, and their skin unblemished. In some regions, a man's ability to grow a healthy beard signalled virility and honour. In others, smooth cheeks were the mark of youthful beauty. It all depended on where and when you lived. There's an open scholarly debate on whether these endless skin rituals actually improved anyone's appearance, or just made the whole population a little more inventive, and possibly more paranoid. Some suggest beauty recipes were a form of social bonding, a way for women to share secrets, vent, and find camaraderie. Others see it as another burden, an impossible goal set by a society obsessed with surfaces. For peasants, the goal was more basic: stay clean enough to avoid disease, but don't waste precious resources. If you worked the fields, your hands and face were your calling cards, tanned, weathered, and honest. Some rural traditions even praised sun-kissed skin as a sign of health and hard work, a direct challenge to the delicate pallor prized at court. Another fun callback: remember the crocodile dung facial? Some village healers had their own ideas, recommending mud from sacred springs or a nightly rinse with moonlit dew. Folk remedies passed down through generations sometimes worked, and sometimes made you the subject of jokes at the tavern. The beauty routines could be endless. Morning masks, midday touch-ups, nightly prayers for clear skin. All while the threat of pox, plague and scars lingered in every shadow. If nothing else, the medieval obsession with skin reveals a universal truth. People will always chase impossible standards, often at their own expense. As the candle burns low, you find yourself thankful for your own simple routines. A little soap, a little water, and the hope that tomorrow you'll wake up blemish-free. In the quiet of the medieval night, you offer up a silent prayer for clear skin and dream of a world where beauty doesn't hurt quite so much. You turn in your sleep wishing away memories of caustic potions and mysterious scars, but beauty in medieval life wasn't just about what you looked like. It was also about what you wore. The clothes you put on each morning were a walking advertisement of your worth, virtue, and of course your ability to follow the ever-shifting rules of fashion. But in a world ruled by sumptuary laws, the original fashion police, looking beautiful was never simply a matter of taste. It was a dangerous game of status, symbolism, and legal boundaries. Mainstream historical fact: throughout medieval Europe, especially from the 13th century onward, kings, queens, and councils issued sumptuary laws, rules that dictated who could wear what colours, fabrics, and styles. The reason? Clothes could be powerful weapons. A lowly merchant's wife in imported silk or a peasant boy in scarlet might be mistaken for nobility. Chaos! The authorities responded by micromanaging every hemline and dye pot. Sumptuary laws varied wildly from place to place and year to year. In England, only those of a certain rank could wear ermine, sable, or scarlet. In Florence, the city council decreed that velvet was for the rich alone, and even then, only in prescribed amounts. If you were caught breaking the rules, wearing a forbidden trim or flaunting a prescribed colour, you might be fined, shamed, or forced to surrender your beloved garment. But here's the quirky tidbit. Sumptuary laws often backfired spectacularly. Instead of quelling competition, they fueled new waves of creativity. Want forbidden fur? Add a hidden lining. Can't wear gold embroidery? Embroider in yellow silk and wink at those in the know. There are tales of rebellious tailors and crafty housewives who stitched their family's status into secret seams, outsmarting the law with every snip of the shears. As you slip into your daydream, you find yourself standing before a medieval wardrobe. What do you choose? If you're a noble, you reach for a gown of deep blue, dyed with imported indigo, a pigment so precious it's worth its weight in gold. If you're less privileged, your palette is limited. Soft browns, muddy greens, faded yellows. Even your belt or shoe buckle is scrutinised. A too bright ribbon might mark you as an upstart. A fine linen shift could arouse suspicion. Historians still argue about the real impact of sumptuary laws. Did most people comply, trembling before the watchful eyes of the local bailiff? Or did they ignore the rules whenever possible, trusting in luck or connections to shield them from punishment? Court records tell both stories, of peasants fined for a too flashy hood, and of merchants who quietly paid off officials to turn a blind eye. Clothing wasn't just about status either, it was about beauty. Certain shapes were idealised: long flowing sleeves, tight waists, elaborate hoods and veils. The fit and fall of your dress signalled not only your wealth, but your refinement. Women were expected to move with slow, careful grace. A misstep could send your elaborate train trailing through mud, undoing hours of careful dressing. The beauty ideal for men: a sharply cut doublet, hose that hugged the legs, a cloak with just the right drape. In Burgundy, the latest craze might be pointy hennins for women, those soaring cone-shaped hats, while in Venice no self-respecting lady would be seen without platform chopines, shoes so tall you needed a servant just to cross the room. Joke break. What's worse than tripping over your pelanes? Getting stuck in a doorway because your hennin is too tall. Medieval parties had their hazards. Accessories mattered as much as fabric. Jewels and embroidery were strictly controlled. A sapphire necklace could signal noble birth or dangerous ambition. Pins and brooches served double duty as both decoration and status marker. In some cases, the shape of your headgear, flat cap, hood, or veil, advertised your marital status, regional roots, or even your political loyalties. For instance, a special badge or ribbon could show support for a local lord or a religious order. Clothes were a coded language and everyone was expected to read it. Quirky detail: there were even laws about underwear. In some Italian cities, the colour or quality of your shift or hose was policed just as much as your outer garments. Inspectors, yes, actual underwear police, could be dispatched to weddings or festivals to make sure no one dared to wear forbidden lace or fine linen beneath their rough wool. Sumptuary laws were always in part about control. Authorities worried that social climbing through fashion could upset the natural order. If a servant girl dressed like a duchess, how could you tell your betters from your lessers? The lines between beauty, power and propriety were razor thin, but the real joke was on the lawmakers. As soon as one fabric or colour was banned, a new fad appeared. Wealthy families commissioned tailors to invent ever more elaborate trimmings. New guilds arose, specialising in the fine art of legal evasion. The result? Fashion moved faster than the law could keep up. Open scholarly debate. Did sumptuary laws actually work? Did they reinforce class distinctions or just give everyone a headache? Some historians argue that, if nothing else, the laws created a sense of shared frustration, an equalising annoyance that cut across rank. Others see them as largely symbolic, more about projecting authority than changing real behaviour. In the village, things were simpler but not immune to status signalling. A patch of embroidery or a new ribbon in your hair might make you the talk of the parish for weeks. Children were dressed plainly, but even they found ways to sneak in colour. dyed wool scraps or a lucky charm stitched to a sleeve. Market days and festivals were prime time to show off. Some families saved up for years to buy a bit of luxury fabric for a daughter's wedding dress, passing it down from mother to daughter as a cherished heirloom. But even for the humble, there were risks. A well-dressed farm girl might be mistaken for someone above her station, and that could bring trouble. Stories circulate of young women who donned their finest for a festival and attracted the unwanted attention of a local lord, or were accused of pretending to be more than they were. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, beauty could be both blessing and curse. Another quirky tidbit: in some places, strict sumptuary laws created a black market for forbidden fashion. Smugglers trafficked in rare dyes, silks, and even finished garments, sneaking them over borders or through city gates hidden in barrels of grain. Outlaws became unlikely trendsetters, with the daring and the desperate leading the way in underground couture. For the rich, the stakes were highest. One misplaced gemstone or too bright velvet could land you in court. Some tried to outdo the laws themselves, dressing ever more extravagantly as a show of defiance, or sometimes repentance. There are stories of noblewomen appearing in sackcloth after being fined, only to re-emerge at the next feast in something even more fabulous. It's easy to laugh at the absurdities. The lord with the train so long he needs 2 pages to carry it, the merchant's wife hiding silk sleeves under a plain wool cloak. But the anxiety was real. Beauty and fashion were ways to get ahead, yes, but also to make enemies, court danger, and spark envy or suspicion. You snuggle deeper under your blanket, grateful that your own pyjamas aren't subject to government inspection. The medieval world, it turns out, was a universe of fabric and colour codes, one where beauty was watched, weighed, and sometimes mercilessly policed. As you slip further into sleep, you realise that the pressure to look the part, to signal status and worth through what you wear, is one more way the impossible standards of medieval beauty reached into every corner of daily life. And tomorrow, when you dream of wandering a bustling marketplace or attending a midnight feast, you'll know every ribbon, every hem, every glint of metal on your sleeve is a tiny, dangerous act of self-expression. You're floating in the warmth of your medieval blanket, imagining for a moment the delicate rustle of velvet and the soft glow of candles catching on gold thread. But now, as the dream shifts, you find yourself not in the bustling market or peasant field, but at court, where beautiful isn't just about how you look or what you wear, but about who sets the standards in the first place. Here, you meet the true trendsetters, queens, kings, princesses and dashing lords, whose looks ripple out across kingdoms, shaping what everyone else aspires to, even if those ideals are as unattainable as a fairy tale castle. Mainstream historical fact: in nearly every kingdom and duchy across medieval Europe, the royal family, especially the queen, defined what it meant to be beautiful. Their portraits were copied, their fashions emulated, their peculiarities, quirks, or even perceived flaws transformed into the latest craze. Eleanor of Aquitaine's slender figure, Isabel of Bavaria's famously high forehead, Anne of Bohemia's delicate hands, all became symbols not just of royal status but of beauty itself. Poets praised the snowy skin of Blanche of Castile, while troubadours wrote love songs to Margaret of Anjou's raven hair. Whether you lived in a muddy village or a city palace, you knew the names and the looks of the era's celebrity royals. But the flip side, royal perfection was almost always out of reach for ordinary folk. The Queen had access to imported creams, rare perfumes, professional dresses, and the best of everything. Her look was achieved with a team, money, and sometimes outright deception. Portraits were often idealised, smoothed, and enhanced by artists eager to flatter. The result? Beauty became not just impossible, but mythical. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some kings and queens became obsessed with setting the trend, not just following it. There's the story of Philip the Fair of France, who ordered all his courtiers to pluck their eyebrows and wear shoes with absurdly long points, insisting that the court must shine like the moon among stars. Or Isabella of France, who loved blue so much that a queen's blue dye was developed just for her, and everyone who could afford it clamoured to copy her exact shade. The royal look could have unexpected effects. When Queen Elizabeth of Hungary popularised rosemary water as a skin tonic, suddenly every noblewoman wanted a bottle. Never mind that most couldn't afford the real thing. The wealthy hired apothecaries to make elaborate imitations. The poor soaked rosemary in rainwater and hoped for the best. Some women even slept with sprigs of the herb beneath their pillows, believing it would make them dream of beauty. For men, the stakes were equally high. If the king sported a carefully trimmed beard or a certain style of hat, every noble in the land followed suit. French and Burgundian courts quarrelled over the correct way to tie a doublet or how high to perch a feather in one's cap. In England, King Edward IV's height and golden hair became the masculine ideal. Shorter, dark-haired men had to work twice as hard to make a splash at court. Open scholarly debate. Did royal standards trickle down to the masses, or were they confined to the upper crust? Some historians argue that even the lowest born aspired to echo the king's latest look, even in humble ways. A certain colour of wool, a new twist in the hair, a bit of fabric pinned just so. Others contend that for most people, the world of courtly beauty was a distant spectacle, little more than gossip and daydreams. But for those at court, the pressure was immense. A single bad hair day could be political, not just personal. Maids and valets scrambled each morning to recreate the Queen's look. Ladies in waiting risked their health with the harshest creams or the tightest bodices, all for a passing glance from the monarch or the right kind of courtly gossip. The tiniest flaw, a mole, a limp, a sunburn, could send whispers rippling through the palace, and naturally not everyone could keep up. This brings us to another quirky detail. Sometimes royal defects themselves became the latest fad. When Anne of Brittany was painted with slightly protruding ears, suddenly portraits across France feature young women with similar ears, sometimes exaggerated for effect. When Henry VIII's later portraits depicted him as broad-shouldered and ruddy, the English court embraced a beefier ideal, praising good colour and robust appetites. Even scars could become fashionable if worn by the right royal. All of this filtered down through the trickle of portrait miniatures, woodcuts and tapestries, medieval celebrity magazines. Peasants and merchants who could never hope to attend court still saw the Queen's face on coins, in church-stained glass, or even carved into prayer books. Children named their dolls after princesses, and women might toast a wedding with a queen's braid in their hair, tied with blue ribbon or gilded thread. Fashion, beauty, and even romance all followed the court calendar. When the king held a feast, new looks swept the country. Longer trains, brighter silks, a different style of veil or lace. At tournaments and dances, knights and ladies paraded the latest trends for all to see. Poets and troubadours wrote their own reviews, sometimes praise, sometimes sly satire. A particularly brave look could become the stuff of legend. The lady who wore a dress of peacock feathers, or the knight who painted his face with gold dust for a masquerade. Of course, not all admired the courtly beauty standards. Some churchmen denounced the excess as vanity and sin. There's a famous sermon by the Archbishop of York warning that the search for beauty leads only to pride and folly. Satirists and street performers made fun of the nobility's quirks, imitating their walks, gestures, and even their latest improvements. The divide between royal and common beauty sometimes sparked envy, but also laughter. Joke time. Why did the Queen's dog wear a silk ribbon and a jewel on its collar? Because it could. Sumptuary laws didn't apply to pets, and besides, every trendsetter needs a loyal follower. Still, royal beauty standards weren't all about appearance. They could also signal power and morality. Queens commissioned tapestries showing themselves as saints or biblical heroines, using their image to promote piety, wisdom, or charity. A soft, calm expression suggested compassion. A firm jaw implied resolve. Even flaws could be spun. Elizabeth I's infamous pockmarks were hidden behind thick white makeup, and celebrated as a mark of her endurance. Beauty for the royal family was always a performance, always a message. Open scholarly debate. Did these images of perfection make ordinary people feel hopeful or just discouraged? Were queens and princesses role models or unreachable icons? Did courtly standards create admiration, resentment, or both? The chronicles disagree, and the answers shift with time and place. For the few who moved between worlds, merchants' daughters married to minor lords, scholars summoned to court, the contrast was dizzying. One moment, you're in a world where a patch of lace is the height of fashion. The next, you're back home, where it's just a scrap of fabric. The pressure to adapt could be overwhelming, and sometimes led to the invention of entirely new styles, a blending of city and country, rich and poor. And as always, there were the rebels. Now and then a prince refused to cut his hair, or a duchess appeared at a banquet in plain linen, shocking the court. Some royals even mocked the standards, dressing in disguise, playing practical jokes, or turning a trend upside down just to see who would follow. Sometimes, the greatest beauty was in breaking the rules, not obeying them. You meanwhile wander through the palace of dreams, watching the flicker of torchlight on jewel-bright fabrics, and listening to the soft whisper of silk. Tomorrow, you'll wake up to your own reflection, maybe a little less royal, but just as real. And if you find yourself longing for a new look, just remember, the standards may change, but the urge to keep up or stand out is as old as crowns and castles. You stir, imagining the dazzling court receding into the distance, its glamour lingering like the trace of a perfume. But medieval beauty was never just a matter of smooth skin, polished shoes, or royal fashions. It often came down to the quirks and oddities of the body itself. The stories people told, the charms they whispered, and the superstitions they harboured all gave rise to a wild catalogue of physical features considered beautiful, lucky, or sometimes deeply suspect. Tonight you find yourself squinting at your own reflection, wondering, would your traits have been a blessing or a curse in the Middle Ages? Are you the lucky owner of a dimpled chin or a single dramatic eyebrow? In this world, the line between beauty and peculiarity is as thin as a single lock of hair. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval sources brim with comments on physical quirks, both celebrated and feared. Some features were universally admired. Dimples in cheeks or chins were linked to luck and laughter, while a well-shaped nose, neither too sharp nor too flat, could hint at noble lineage. Yet others, like freckles, moles, or birthmarks, drew suspicion, rumoured to be the witch's mark, or a sign of sin. Tales abounded of lovers swooning for a perfectly cleft chin or a mysterious beauty spot, while others might recoil at a single stray hair in the wrong place. Let's start with dimples, a quirky tidbit and a favourite in many regions. Songs, poems and folk tales praised girls with dimples as deep as the king's coffers, or a chin with its own little smile. These features suggested a cheerful spirit, youthful health, and the favour of fate. In some parts of France and England, parents would gently press a newborn's cheeks, hoping to encourage dimples and bring lifelong luck. For boys, a strong cleft chin or dimple was seen as a mark of courage or future greatness. Then there's the unibrow, the meeting of eyebrows into a single line above the eyes. Across southern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean, this was not just acceptable but celebrated. A bold unibrow signalled intelligence, power and sensuality. Mothers painted in extra darkness, young women traced charcoal between their brows, and poets praised the single arc above twin stars. In Byzantium and Moorish Spain, a strong brow meant a strong mind. Yet, in northern and western Europe, the unibrow became a point of mockery, proof that beauty is always in the eye of the beholder, or perhaps the beholder's neighbour. There's an open scholarly debate on why these regional differences persisted. Was it a matter of climate, culture, or the wandering whims of art and poetry? Some say ancient Roman ideals lingered in the south, while the north followed its own path of pale foreheads and vanishing brows. Moles and birthmarks posed their own puzzle. In some eras, a well-placed mole, a beauty spot on the cheek or above the lip, was prized, the inspiration for delicate silk patches, as you heard in Section 8. But too many spots, or one in an unlucky place, sparked rumours of witchcraft or devil's bargains. Superstition hung heavy over the body. A mole on your left shoulder could bring misfortune, while one on your right cheek might make you irresistible. There are even records of wise women paid to read moles and freckles, promising glimpses into your future, or your past. Dimples and moles weren't the only quirks in demand. A small gap between the front teeth was called a lucky tooth, or teeth of happiness in parts of France, associated with good singing and quick wit. In Germany, a rosy birthmark was seen as a mark of the fairy blessed. In some Slavic countries, a woman with naturally red hair was both admired for her beauty and feared for her supposed magic. The line between admiration and anxiety was always shifting, always unstable. Joke break. Why did Lady Cecily draw a tiny heart on her cheek before the feast? Because Sir Geoffrey said he'd only dance with a woman marked by love, and she wasn't leaving anything to chance. But for every blessed feature, there was one that spelled trouble. Crooked fingers, extra toes, or devil's marks, random discolorations, scars, or even unusual freckles could mean a life of gossip, exclusion, or even trial. The infamous witch hunts of the late medieval period relied on hunting for such signs. More than one poor soul spent a lifetime hiding a mole or a birthmark, just in case the wrong person saw it. The open scholarly debate here centres on how much these beliefs actually affected everyday life. Some historians point to court records and folk tales as proof that physical quirks could change destinies. Others argue that most people simply lived with what they had, relying on the right story, charm, or fashionable patch to turn a curse into a blessing. And then there were odd charms, things people carried, wore, or whispered to encourage beauty or ward off the evil eye. In Italy, coral beads were worn to protect children's complexions and keep freckles at bay. In Ireland, a pinch of earth from a churchyard tucked in your shoe would guard against unwanted moles. In France, girls sometimes tied ribbons in their hair to draw beauty from the dawn. Magic and medicine danced together in the quest for a perfect face. These quirks also played out in medieval art. Look closely at illuminated manuscripts or the stone faces of a cathedral, and you'll see a wild parade of noses, brows, chins and cheeks, each distinct, each carefully rendered, a reminder that ideals were both celebrated and subverted. Some artists exaggerated dimples or arched brows for comic effect. Others hid secret symbols in a beauty mark or lock of hair, messages for those who knew where to look. For those with unusual features, life could be a challenge. A pronounced scar might spark suspicion. A pronounced dimple could open doors. Children grew up hearing stories of the legendary beauty who danced with a rose birthmark, or the clever rogue whose gap-toothed grin won him the heart of a duchess. Folklore became a survival guide. What to show, what to hide, how to turn a liability into an asset. One last quirky tidbit. In some villages, the local healer or wise woman would anoint a baby's face with the first snow or the juice of a spring flower, hoping to shape its features for good fortune. These rituals might seem strange, but at heart they were just expressions of hope, a wish that a child would find acceptance and admiration in a world where beauty could open doors or close them forever. And so, as you nestle deeper under your covers, you marvel at the medieval tapestry of oddities and charms. Every crooked smile, every freckle or dimple, every superstitious ribbon was part of the game, a reminder that beauty even then was never truly uniform or predictable. Tonight, you count your quirks, not as flaws, but as stories, each one a thread in the strange, shimmering fabric of the past. You settle deeper beneath your blanket, imagining a world thick with candles, prayers, and, if we're honest, some very questionable smells. Because in medieval times, beauty wasn't just what you saw, it was what you sensed. The nose, as much as the eyes, ruled the game. Tonight you're drifting through perfumed courts and smoky village huts, unravelling the strange story of scents, bathing taboos, and the curious art of smelling beautiful. Mainstream historical fact: the medieval world was far more fragrant and sometimes far more pungent than we might imagine. Aromatic herbs and perfumes were everywhere in the upper echelons of society. The wealthy had access to imported spices and rare oils, rosewater from Persia, ambergris from the sea, musk from the farthest east, and even tiny vials of attar of roses, guarded like treasure. A drop or two dabbed on a wrist or behind the ears could signify sophistication and wealth, setting you apart in any crowded hall. Yet for most people, true cleanliness was elusive. Regular bathing was often discouraged, particularly in the chillier north, out of fear it would let evil humours seep into the body. Public bathhouses flourished in some cities for centuries, places of pleasure, business, even intrigue, but fell under suspicion during epidemics, eventually closing down or being condemned by religious authorities as dens of vice. At home, a full bath was a luxury, most managed with a quick scrub of hands, face and feet, plus a generous dusting of herbs or a spritz of rosewater if you were lucky enough to afford it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Because water was believed to carry disease, many medieval beauty guides advised against too much washing. Instead, dry bathing became the norm for the rich, rubbing the body with linen cloths soaked in herbal infusions, followed by a dusting of aromatic powders, lavender, rosemary, sage, and sweet marjoram. These rituals left skin perfumed and soft, but they did little to fight actual dirt. The result? The clean at court were sometimes less clean than their peasant counterparts, who at least bathed in rivers when the weather allowed. For women, fragrance was a form of armour. A well-scented lady could float through a hall, her presence marked by whispers. Did you smell Lady Blanche's new jasmine water? Scented gloves, pomanders, little balls of perfume worn on the belt or held in the hand, and even sweet-smelling jewellery were all the rage. The pomander in particular was believed to ward off illness, especially the dreaded plague. Tucked up a sleeve or pressed to the nose in a crowded street, it was both a fashion statement and a desperate measure. Historians still argue over just how stinky the Middle Ages really were. Some records insist that the wealthy were surprisingly fastidious, washing and changing clothes more often than we assume. Others paint a world of overwhelming odours, human, animal, culinary and chemical, especially in crowded towns where chamber pots emptied onto the streets. The truth? Likely both. Bursts of heady perfume in the palace, honest sweat in the field, and everywhere the tang of wood smoke, wet wool and life lived close to the land. Joke break. Why did Sir Roland always win at hide and seek? Because you could smell everyone else before you saw them. Not all scents were desirable. Medieval homes were filled with strong odours from open hearths, tallow candles, fermented foods and livestock. To fight these, even the poorest families hung bundles of dried herbs from rafters, or tucked mint and thyme in chests of linen. Some households scattered rushes on the floor, regularly refreshed and perfumed with meadow sweet or lavender, to mask the less pleasant realities below. The open scholarly debate: did medieval folk simply endure the smells, or did they actively fight back with every means available? Some anthropologists argue that the medieval nose was less sensitive, or at least less bothered, by odours we find appalling. Others counter that the records of perfume recipes and scented linen prove a universal human desire to mask and modify the world through fragrance. For men, the art of scent was just as fraught. Knights and courtiers were expected to appear both powerful and pleasant. A bad-smelling man might be accused of laziness, drunkenness, or, worst of all, poor breeding. Some noblemen carried scented handkerchiefs or wore sachets of herbs in their doublets. It was said that Richard the Lionheart could be tracked across his campsites by the trail of rosewater left behind. Perhaps more legend than fact, but a legend with its own kind of truth. Peasants, meanwhile, had to make do with what grew nearby. A country girl might wash her hair with rosemary, or rub her arms with crushed mint before the harvest festival. Old wives taught their daughters the secrets of wildflowers, how to steep elderflowers for a quick rinse, or carry a sprig of pennyroyal in a bodice for protection and pleasantness. Some rural traditions praised the scent of fresh earth and hay as honest and healthy, a badge of a good day's work. The church had its own relationship with scent. Incense, frankincense, and myrrh transformed cathedrals into realms of the sacred. Their fragrance meant to call the mind heavenward. Monasteries became centres for the study and cultivation of medicinal herbs, with gardens devoted to every known scent, soothing, cleansing, or purely decorative. There's another quirky tidbit. Some medieval beauty guides encouraged eating fragrant herbs to sweeten the blood and, by extension, the body's natural scent. Dishes flavoured with sage, marjoram, or parsley weren't just for taste. They were believed to make breath, sweat, and even dreams more beautiful. Garlic, on the other hand, was best avoided if you hoped for a kiss at the midsummer fair. Odours also had meanings. The sharp, acrid tang of vinegar marked a healer's home. The sweet musk of amber signalled the arrival of a wealthy visitor. A whiff of smoke and spice on a man's cloak might announce his return from distant lands, or just his success in bartering at the local market. Beauty was not only what people saw, but what lingered after they'd gone. In towns, enterprising merchants sold tiny, sweet bags to be hung around the neck, tucked into purses, or slipped between bed linens. Recipes for these bags, equal parts perfume and pest control, survive in medieval cookbooks and medical texts. During times of plague or pestilence, doctors wore beaked masks stuffed with herbs and spices, convinced that sweet scents would block the bad air of disease. Another joke. What did the medieval lady say to the overzealous perfumer? If I wanted to smell like a spice market, I'd just move in with your mother. Even the act of sleeping was scented. Pillows were stuffed with lavender, bedsheets sprinkled with rosewater, and lovers exchanged gifts of scented hair ribbons. In some places, it was customary to burn juniper branches in the hearth before bedtime, filling the air with a comforting, smoky perfume thought to bring good dreams and ward off illness. Still, not all medieval advice was sound. Some texts warned against fragrant baths, which were believed to inflame passions and lead to sin. Others insisted that a faint muskiness was a sign of natural health, not something to be scrubbed away. Peasant proverbs mocked city noses as too delicate, unable to appreciate the honest smells of hay, bread, and rain. The open scholarly debate here is timeless. Is beauty found in erasing nature or embracing it? Were medieval men and women fighting a losing battle against odour, or weaving it into the texture of their lives? The answer perhaps is both. A world where rose petals and wood smoke mingle, where beauty is as much about memory and sensation as about anything you can see. As you sink into sleep, you imagine the scents of a medieval night, the cool tang of stone, the sweet ghost of a lavender sachet, the distant smoke of a village hearth. Tomorrow you'll wake to your own familiar world, but tonight, let yourself wander through a garden of lost fragrances, following the thread of beauty from one breath to the next. The medieval night grows darker, and with every breath you take, the scents of lavender and wood smoke linger, mingling with the imagined echoes of candlelit laughter. But in the flickering half-light, the desire to change the face, to add colour, erase flaws and conjure a different self, grows as relentless as ever. Tonight, you tumble headlong into the strange, risky world of medieval cosmetics. Powders, rouges, and secret recipes, where the line between beauty and danger is as thin as a dusting of lead. Mainstream historical fact: by the late Middle Ages, cosmetics were not just for queens and courtiers. Women, and occasionally men, across Europe experimented with homemade and purchased concoctions to perfect their faces. Pale skin remained the standard, so whitening powders were in constant demand. Women crushed white lead, chalk, or ground bone to dust, mixing them with vinegar or rosewater to create a thick, sticky paste. The result, a porcelain mask that might look divine by candlelight, but which slowly poisoned the wearer day by day. That's the first uncomfortable truth. The most effective cosmetics were, by modern standards, highly toxic. Lead, mercury and arsenic appeared in recipes everywhere, blended with egg white for smoothing, with vinegar to strip oils, or with honey to set a finish. Early physicians warned of rashes, trembling hands and melting skin, but the pressure for beauty was relentless. You might have known deep down that your morning routine was dangerous, but the lure of flawless skin was hard to resist. Quirky tidbit. Medieval makeup wasn't just about the skin. Some fashionistas mixed soot or lamp black with animal fat to darken their eyelashes and brows. An early mascara, applied with sticks or tiny brushes, red ochre or ground cochineal beetles provided colour for the cheeks and lips, while a dab of honey kept rouge in place. There's even evidence of women rubbing cut beets or mulberries onto their cheeks for a natural flush. Imagine facing the day with your lips stained bright as a berry, hoping the effect would last through feasts, dances, or long hours at market. But there were subtler tricks too. To create the illusion of higher cheekbones, some women applied a faint shadow of grey or blue powder under the eyes or along the jaw. Centuries before, contouring would become a modern craze. Want a sparkle in your eye? A dab of egg white on the eyelids promised a glossy shine, while a sprinkle of ground pearls made the skin gleam like the moon. For lips, red was the rage. Recipes survived for crimson salves made of madder root, alkanet, or even sheep's blood, thickened with wax or tallow. The bolder the colour, the better. And yet, in some regions, especially among the pious, too much makeup was seen as sinful, the mark of vanity or even witchcraft. There was a constant tension. Look beautiful, but not too beautiful. Stand out, but only in the right way. Historians still argue about how widely makeup was used among the lower classes. Some sources insist that peasants shunned cosmetics as a sign of idleness or loose morals, while others point to records of rural women tinting their cheeks with berry juice or lightening their skin with flour on festival days. Open scholarly debate continues. Was makeup a symbol of liberation or submission, rebellion or conformity? Was it truly widespread, or mostly confined to court and city? Of course, not every ingredient was dangerous. Medieval women and men loved rosewater for its gentle scent and mild cleansing properties. Almond oil, beeswax and honey could soften skin, and herbal rinses soothed irritations. If you were lucky, your local apothecary or wise woman knew which recipes would help, and which were best left to the bravest, or most desperate, of beauty seekers. But some sought out the strangest recipes, convinced that magic, alchemy, or the blessing of a saint could transform them. Manuscripts record instructions for celestial water, a blend of dew collected before sunrise, mixed with herbs and a whispered prayer. Others swore by frog-spawn ointment for banishing freckles, or by a poultice of mashed snails to erase wrinkles. Beauty, in the medieval world, hovered always at the edge of the miraculous and the absurd. Let's break for a joke. Why did Lady Joan stop wearing her favourite rouge? Because every time it rained, she left red streaks down her cheeks, and a trail of confused suitors. Cosmetics could also be a weapon. Rival ladies competed in the art of subtle alteration, using powders and pastes to outshine one another at feasts and festivals. There are stories of a noblewoman mixing lampblack into her rival's face cream, ensuring a disastrous result before the king's banquet. Rumours flew through courts who was faking beauty, who relied on devil's dust, whose glowing complexion was a little too good to be true. Yet makeup could also be empowering. For a woman with a birthmark, a scar, or simply the wrong colour of cheeks, cosmetics offered a measure of control. Some saw the face as a canvas, a space to play with colour, shadow and light. A clever application might hide the signs of illness, fatigue or heartbreak, or send a secret signal, a scarlet lip or a bold brow meant only for a chosen admirer. But it was risky. Beyond the slow, creeping dangers of lead and mercury, there was the threat of exposure. Priests and preachers railed against vanity. Jealous rivals might whisper that your beauty was a lie. The line between art and deceit was always blurred. Some married women painted their faces in secret, scrubbing off every trace before their husbands returned home. Open scholarly debate. Did men secretly admire the artifice, or did they truly prefer natural beauty? Letters and poems from the period suggest both, a fascination with the mysterious power of painted faces and a longing for the simplicity, or at least the imagined simplicity, of unadorned skin. Men too dabbled in cosmetics, though more discreetly. A touch of powder to mask redness, a smear of scented wax on the moustache, or even a little colour on the lips for feasts or courtly plays. These were not unheard of. Knights competing in tournaments sometimes dusted their armour and faces with gold powder, hoping to catch a lady's eye. The pursuit of beauty was, after all, universal. One last quirky tidbit. In some cities, cosmetic guilds sprang up. Early associations of perfumers, apothecaries, and beauty experts who competed for the business of the rich and powerful. Recipes were fiercely guarded secrets, passed down through generations or sold for fortunes. The rivalry between these guilds was legendary, with accusations of sabotage, theft, and even attempted poisoning. Beauty, it seemed, could be a dangerous trade. So you lie there, eyes closed, picturing a world of flickering mirrors and secret jars, where every face was both mask and message. In the medieval night, the wish for beauty was both hope and hazard, a powder-dusted tightrope walk between admiration and danger, innovation and disaster. As sleep pulls you further under, you smile, relieved, perhaps, that your own makeup routine is a little less lethal. But part of you wonders at the courage, creativity, and sheer audacity of the men and women who risked everything for the hope of being, if only for an evening, impossibly beautiful. As you curl deeper under your blanket, you realise medieval beauty wasn't dictated by courts, cosmetics, or curious charms alone. It was shaped just as fiercely by the church. Tonight, you slip into a world where faith and appearance are so closely intertwined that even your reflection seems to whisper, "Are you pious enough to be pretty?" Welcome to the shadowy crossroads of holiness, guilt, and the impossible standards of beauty set not by artists or royals, but by priests and saints. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout the Middle Ages, Christianity, especially as interpreted by the Catholic Church, profoundly influenced attitudes toward the body. Physical beauty was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was seen as a reflection of God's grace, proof that the soul was well-ordered and favoured by heaven. Medieval sermons and treatises are littered with the language of radiance, purity, and the beauty of holiness. On the other, the Church taught that pride in one's looks was a dangerous temptation. Vanity, after all, was a sin. In extreme forms, it was linked to the devil and the fall of man. So you awaken in a world of contradiction. In church, illuminated saints glow with perfect pale faces, unblemished and serene, while outside, preachers thunder against the painted cheeks and plucked brows of fashionable women. The result? An endless, exhausting push and pull, striving for beauty, then apologising for it, then striving again. In art and hagiography, saints are often depicted as ethereal, white skin, golden hair, and placid expressions. The Virgin Mary sets the ultimate ideal, a face as calm as moonlight, a body untainted by labour or sin. Paintings, frescoes, and stained glass all reinforce this. Holy equals spotless, gentle, eternally young. For women especially, the pressure is relentless. Your body is not really yours. It's a vessel to be presented to God, judged for its purity as much as for its beauty. Quirky tidbit. Many convents had their own beauty rituals, not for vanity but to imitate saintly perfection. Young nuns would rinse their faces with rose water and lemon, or wear fresh herbs behind their ears, to keep the mind uplifted. There are records of abbesses gently scolding novices for appearing too pale or too tired, reminding them that cheerfulness and a glowing face inspire devotion in others. Yet the Church's relationship with beauty was never straightforward. Open scholarly debate continues over whether the clergy genuinely feared women's allure or simply used it as a means of control. Some scholars see the condemnation of vanity as a way to keep social order intact, channeling women's energy away from self-expression and toward piety, humility and service. Others argue that the church was at times remarkably tolerant, allowing certain holy forms of adornment and even praising natural beauty as a gift. There's another odd contradiction. While beauty was celebrated in saints and angels, it was also treated with suspicion. Many medieval sermons warned that too much concern for looks could invite demonic temptation. Women who were too beautiful risked being labelled as enchantresses or even witches, while men who preened faced accusations of effeminacy or pride. Mirror gazing, especially on Sundays, was discouraged or even forbidden. Joke break. Why did Brother Martin hide the monastery's only mirror? To stop the novices from checking for halos instead of praying. The greatest test of this tension came in stories of female saints. Legends are full of women who were famed for their beauty, yet shunned it as a snare. St. Agnes, St. Cecilia and St. Clare are described as radiant, but they veil their faces, cut their hair and reject all worldly adornment. Some legends even tell of saints whose beauty provoked unwanted attention or violence, only to be miraculously transformed. Faces turning stony, hair falling away, bodies covered in sores. Holiness in these tales becomes the ultimate disguise. And then there are the mortifications, the self-imposed uglyings, undertaken by especially devout women. Some saints rubbed their faces with ashes, wore coarse hair shirts under their gowns, or wounded themselves to escape marriage or the gaze of suitors. Their goal was not simply to avoid sin, but to claim a different kind of beauty, the radiance of suffering, the mark of martyrdom. For ordinary women, these stories offered both comfort and confusion. Was it right to care about your looks, or was it a trap? Could you braid your hair for a feast, or did you risk your soul by delighting in colour and style? Folk traditions tried to find a middle path, blessing a ribbon with holy water, wearing a cross-shaped pendant as both adornment and protection, praying that a new dress would not turn the heart toward pride. The men weren't immune either. Monks and priests cultivated their own ascetic look, shaved heads, plain habits, bare feet. Yet saints' lives often emphasized their gentle countenances or sweet voices. Even the bearded anchorites who lived alone in the wilds were described as shining with the inner beauty of grace. The open, scholarly debate persists. Did church teachings about beauty empower or imprison? Did they offer a haven for those who felt alienated from secular standards? Or did they simply replace one set of impossibilities with another? Was the obsession with spiritual beauty a genuine comfort, or just a way to mask anxiety about the flesh? Quirky tidbit. Medieval churchgoers sometimes carried small mirrors engraved with prayers or saintly images, an attempt to blend vanity and piety in a single object. There's even a record of a bishop scolding a congregation for spending more time polishing these holy mirrors than their own souls. The liturgical year became a calendar of changing standards. During Lent and Advent, simplicity and sobriety were required. No makeup, jewellery or elaborate hair. Easter and Christmas, by contrast, allowed for a return to colour, ornament and feasting, if done in the right spirit. There are charming tales of village girls hurrying to church in flower crowns on Easter morning, hoping to honour both God and the season's beauty. Not all clergy were severe. Some local priests turned a blind eye to the latest hair ribbon or kohl-lined eye, recognising that a bit of adornment brought joy to the weary. Others became infamous for their own love of finery, embroidered stoles, jewelled crosses or silk-lined robes. The contradiction was everywhere. Beauty was both a threat and a blessing, a sin and a sacrament. You close your eyes, hearing the distant echo of bells and the soft murmur of evening prayer. In the medieval world, to be beautiful was to walk a narrow ridge between pride and piety, desire and discipline. Every act of self-care, every new gown or dab of rosewater was weighed against the fear of falling. Yet for all its warnings and prohibitions, the Church never truly banished the hope for beauty. It simply gave it new meanings, new stories, new rituals. As you drift towards sleep, you find comfort in the knowledge that people of every age have wrestled with these questions. Am I enough? Am I too much? Is it wrong to wish for admiration, or right to seek out grace? The answers shift, but the longing stays. In the silence, you offer your own quiet prayer. For a beauty that doesn't have to hurt, for peace with the body you call home. You turn in your sleep, carried onward by the soft echoes of church bells and the afterglow of candlelit prayers. But tonight's journey isn't finished. Not until you've wandered the wildest, most enchanted places where medieval beauty took root. The world of legends, myths and fairy tales. For every law and sermon there was a story, spun by firelight, whispered in secret, etched in illuminated margins, about faces and bodies so impossibly perfect they could never quite exist in the waking world. Mainstream historical fact: medieval Europe was a world shaped by stories as much as by sermons or royal proclamations. The beautiful in these tales, whether princesses, knights, fae or saints, set ideals so dazzling and remote that real mortals could only dream, envy or despair. In romance poems, fairy tales and miracle legends, beauty wasn't just difficult to achieve, it was supernatural, often dangerous, and sometimes even a curse. Imagine you're a child again, huddled beside your grandmother's knee as she recites the tale of a maiden whose hair spilled down the castle steps like golden water, or a knight whose face shone so bright it blinded the wicked. These images lived not just in words but in tapestries, stained glass and carved church screens. Storybook beauty standards filtered into daily life, creeping into wedding rituals, carnival games, even the hopes and fears of parents gazing at their newborns. Take the ever-popular legend of the Swan Maiden, her skin whiter than snow, lips red as blood, hair dark as night. The fairy tale formula became a template. Skin like ivory, eyes like stars, lips like rose petals. Repeated so often that even peasants who'd never seen a princess dreamed of those impossible traits. And so, girls and women were measured not just against their neighbours or queens, but against the unreachable heroines of every story. Quirky tidbit: some of the wildest standards came straight from the realm of the supernatural. In parts of France and Germany, it was said that only a girl with a moon-shaped face could see fairies in the woods at dusk, while a boy with mirror-clear eyes could catch a glimpse of the devil. Pity the poor soul born with freckles or crooked teeth. Legends blamed these on fairy mischief, a changeling's curse, or a mother who'd offended a local spirit. For men, the standards were equally enchanted. The epic poems prized knights with sun-bright hair, marble limbs, and the strength of 3 oxen. One famous tale described a hero whose golden beard was so dazzling it frightened horses and dazzled maidens. But there was always a twist. Beauty might attract the love of a queen, or the envy of a rival sorcerer. In the Arthurian cycle, Lancelot's perfect face and form become both his greatest blessing and the root of his tragedy. Open scholarly debate. Did these fairy tale standards make life harder for ordinary people, or did they offer an escape? A world of wishful thinking where anyone with luck or magic might transform. Some historians argue that the stories only deepened anxiety about looks. Others suggest they provided a kind of comfort, an alternate universe where ugliness was redeemed, curses broken, and the outcast ultimately rewarded. These stories also shaped real rituals. At medieval weddings, brides wore garlands for beauty, invoking the fairy blessings from their favourite tales. Children's hair was brushed till it shone like the sun, and mothers rubbed infants with butter, hoping to give them smooth, pale skin like the elves. Peasant girls sometimes left offerings at springs or old trees, praying for beauty, grace, and a lucky marriage. If all else failed, you could pin a sprig of rosemary or a dried flower to your shift, a little homemade magic hoping to borrow a drop of fairy tale for yourself. But the stories could cut both ways. Some warned against dangerous beauty. Maidens cursed for their pride were turned into animals or sent wandering through the woods. Over and over, legends insisted, beauty is a blessing, but also a test, a thing that must be earned, guarded, even sacrificed. In the ballad of Tam Lin, the heroine must cling to her lover as he transforms into fire, water, and wild beasts, all for love and for the hope of beauty restored. Joke break. Why did the knight refuse to rescue the princess? She's too perfect, he sighed. I'll never keep up with the laundry. The church sometimes fought back against these pagan ideals, but with mixed results. Saints' lives became fairy tales in their own right. The beautiful virgin who resists temptation, the handsome martyr whose wounds only made him more radiant, the wise old woman whose wrinkled face hides a saintly soul. Miracles, not makeup, could transform the body. And yet even these stories set impossible examples. A skin so flawless it shone through the grave, or a body so light it floated above the earth. Art too spun its own standards. The marginalia of illuminated manuscripts are filled with grotesques and caricatures, ugly faces, exaggerated noses, comic animals, a wink from the artist to say, we know this isn't real. But the central figures, saints, nobles, mythic lovers, remained serenely, impossibly beautiful. Beauty in art was idealized, not observed. Even portraits of real people were corrected by artists, their flaws smoothed away with a brushstroke and a little artistic license. These ideals weren't confined to the upper classes. The oral tradition, songs, riddles and tales passed from village to village, spread the standards far and wide. There's a Welsh lullaby about a baby, as bright as the rowan moon, a Czech proverb that claims, a girl without freckles is like a night without stars. Sometimes beauty was celebrated in its diversity. Sometimes it was narrowed down to a single, fantastical mould. Open, scholarly debate. Did these legends liberate or oppress? Were they an excuse to daydream, or another way to enforce the rules? Some folklorists argue that the most lasting stories are those where beauty turns out to be a trick, where the plain, the clever, or the kind-hearted triumph in the end. Think of Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, or the Loathly Lady tales, where a spell or an act of mercy reveals true loveliness beneath the surface. For the outcast, the one whose nose was too big, whose hair too wild, whose skin too brown or scarred, these stories might sting, but they could also give hope. Maybe someday, a girl might whisper, a fairy godmother will find me too. And sometimes beauty was its own kind of magic, a forbidden love, a dance under the new moon, a secret wish carried in the heart. One last quirky tidbit. In some villages, it was believed that if you wanted to grow beautiful, you had to sleep with a book of fairy tales under your pillow, or, failing that, with a mirror wrapped in a red ribbon. No one could say if it worked, but it made for sweeter dreams. As you drift toward morning, fairy tales swirl in the darkness. A shimmer of gold hair, a flash of silver eyes, a kiss that turns a frog into a prince. You understand, at last, that the greatest power of these impossible standards was not in their cruelty, but in their promise. If only, they whispered, you could be beautiful, everything would change. The world never stopped believing, even if beauty itself was as slippery as a story and as fleeting as a dream. You've wandered through castles and cathedrals, trudged muddy village roads, and stared into the polished mirrors of lords and saints alike. Now, as the medieval night winds down, you find yourself among the ordinary people, the bakers, weavers, ploughmen, maids, who faced beauty standards both relentless and absurd, yet somehow found ways to survive, rebel, or simply make peace with themselves. Because in the end, the history of medieval beauty isn't just about pain and poison, luxury and legend. It's about how real people coped, compromised, and sometimes found a way to feel at home in their own skin. You lie there, picturing yourself as an ordinary medieval villager. Your feet are broad from years in the fields, your hands are calloused and stained, your hair never quite gleams the way it's supposed to in the old ballads. Maybe your brow isn't high or pale enough, your gown too rough, your teeth a little gapped from years of tough bread. Maybe you've heard 100 stories about queens with golden hair, or saints whose beauty glows like a star. But your world is smaller. marked by muddy boots, laughter in the market, the scent of onions and wood smoke. Mainstream historical fact. For the vast majority of medieval people, daily survival mattered more than chasing the latest courtly ideal. Beauty rituals for most were simple. A little lard for cracked hands, a comb made from bone or horn, a splash of cold water in the morning, a braid or ribbon on festival days. Homemade beauty was born of thrift and necessity. In the countryside, sun-browned skin and strong arms were seen as proof of good health and hard work, sometimes even quietly admired, if not celebrated in the poetry of the elite. Yet, even in villages, echoes of impossible standards still reached every hearth. The bride whose hair was too dark, the farmhand whose face bore a childhood scar, the old widow whose wrinkles deepened each year. They all knew what perfection was supposed to look like. Some tried to chase it. A little flower dabbed on cheeks for a wedding, rosemary rinses before a fair, or a blue thread woven into hair to invoke fairy luck. Others scoffed, laughing at the absurdities of the city or the follies of the rich, content to let their quirks and oddities go unpolished. Quirky tidbit. There are folk tales of women hiding their best features, braiding long hair up beneath a cap, or muddying their faces before market day to avoid the gaze of greedy lords. In some regions, clever girls painted a beauty mark in a secret spot. So the fairies would know me, but not the neighbours. There were as many ways to defy the rules as to follow them. The open scholarly debate. How much did these beauty standards actually affect ordinary people? Did the pressure to look a certain way lead to real suffering, or did most simply ignore what they couldn't achieve? Historians argue both sides. Some see the echoes of court and church everywhere, records of young women lamenting their freckles or mothers worrying over their daughters' pale skin. Others find evidence of quiet resistance. Peasant songs mocking painted faces, folk festivals where the ugliest man was crowned the king of fools, or village healers teaching that a happy heart is the best rouge. Rebellion took many forms. Some villagers dressed outrageously for carnival, mocking the high foreheads and pale faces of the elite, with soot, masks and wild hair. Young men painted their teeth black for festival days, joking about the rotten luxury of the rich. Others made their own beauty rituals, a field of wildflowers woven into a May-Day crown, a simple woolen dress cut with extra flair, a secret stash of sweet-smelling herbs for a Sunday bath. Yet there was also resignation, a quiet acceptance that for most, true beauty was out of reach. The hard labour of daily life left a little room for fancy powders or imported perfumes. After a day in the fields or the workshop, even the hope for rosy cheeks might fade beneath layers of sweat and dust. But some found solace in community, laughter around a fire, songs at harvest, a shared joke about the absurdities of the world's demands. A final joke. Why did the baker's daughter use flour on her face before the festival? She figured if it didn't make her beautiful, at least she'd smell like fresh bread. And who could resist that? Yet, for all their hardships, ordinary people often saw beauty where others saw none. The tilt of a nose, the flash of a crooked grin, the way sunlight caught a loose strand of hair. These became sources of pride, moments of affection, small comforts in a world that asked too much. Parents praised their children's freckles, lovers traced the lines on a beloved's weathered hands, and elders told stories of the prettiest girl in the village, who was also the bravest or the kindest or the best at telling tales. There were even moments of genuine freedom. A day at the fair, a stolen swim in the river, a moonlit walk when no one was watching but the owls and stars. In those hours, beauty became something felt, not seen. The warmth of a shared blanket, the taste of ripe fruit, the sound of laughter echoing in the dusk. Open scholarly debate. Did these small rebellions and private joys amount to a real challenge to the age's impossible standards? Or did the constant comparison to queens, saints, and fairy tale heroines always win out in the end? Maybe the answer lies somewhere in between. A dance of hope and resignation, rebellion and surrender, that every generation learns in its own way. Even as new standards arrived, brought by traders, conquerors, wandering minstrels, or the next beautiful stranger in town, the old patterns persisted. Each village, each family, each heart carried its own idea of what was lovely, what was good, what was enough. Some embroidered new meanings onto ancient beliefs, others quietly let go, and in rare moments even the impossible seemed possible. The girl with crooked teeth caught the eye of the best dancer at the harvest festival. The scarred soldier was crowned king of the feast. The widow with silver hair taught the village children to make flower crowns, for beauty and for joy. The history of medieval beauty is finally a history of longing, for belonging, for acceptance, for moments of grace. As the night deepens, you see yourself not as a king or a saint, but as a part of this endless, hopeful crowd. You are flawed, unfinished, shaped by the impossible, yet somehow more real because of it. The standards were brutal, yes, but the human heart, curious, stubborn, capable of laughter, was always searching for a new way to define beauty, even in the face of the impossible. You turn over, eyes heavy, and let the village quiet fall around you. There will always be stories of princesses with golden hair, saints with unblemished skin, and queens whose beauty could stop the world. But tonight, you remember the weaver's rough hands, the shepherd's sunburnt nose, the laughter rising from a circle of friends, and realize this too is a kind of beauty, maybe the truest kind of all. Now, let yourself drift. The fire in your imaginary cottage has burned low, its last embers glowing softly in the hearth. Shadows play across the worn stones and simple wood beams, painting gentle shapes on the walls, a reminder of all the faces and stories you've met on this long journey. With each slow breath, you let go of the sharpness of old expectations, the sting of impossible comparisons, the ache of wanting to be something you're not. The world outside your window is quiet now. The fields have settled beneath the stars, the forest hums with the soft music of night creatures, and far away, church bells toll a last slow note. Somewhere, a river glimmers under the moon, moving at its own pace, unconcerned with paleness or finery or fame. You nestle deeper into your covers, feeling the soft weight of the present, your own breathing, the steady beat of your heart, the simple miracle of resting in safety. All those harsh standards, wild remedies, and longing glances are distant now, faded into story and dream. You remember the kindness in a calloused hand, the laughter in a crooked smile, the warmth of belonging that doesn't care about perfect brows or golden hair. Tonight, you have nothing to prove. The world is softer, gentler, just for you. Let yourself surrender to rest, floating free from the old burdens, warmed by the quiet beauty that's always lived within you. Close your eyes, you're enough. Sleep well, traveller.